Hello, everyone. It's Dom here from Esports News UK, and thank you for joining us today. We've got a great interview lined up. I've been wanting to do this interview for I can't tell you how long. It's we're joined by two brothers and great UK League of Legends casters, Initialise and Nymaera. Lee Jones is going to be interviewing the two of them here. Now, if you have questions for Initialise or Nymaera or both of them, please ask them in the chat. We'll do our best to get onto them. Might not be able to answer all of them because Lee and I have got lots of questions for Nymaera and Initialise. We'll be talking about their background, how they've gone from grassroots UK League of Legends up to the NLC, now the LEC, and talking about their love of Japanese League of Legends as well, the officially unofficial LJL channel that they have, and lots more besides. So I'm really excited. Delighted for them to be here. Hope you enjoy this live interview, and I'll see you in the chat. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks very much, Dom. Yeah, hi guys. And
Hey.
just as a quick preface to the interview, so Nymaera and myself are in a prediction league currently for EU Masters. So if there's any animosity and there's a bit of an edge to the interview, it is because we're opponents. I'm going to do my best to put differences aside for the next hour. So I'd ask you, Nymaera, if you could do the same. That's all right as well.
Well, as far as I remember, you voted for all the NLC teams that you did. Yeah, I was actually just checking in the background. You voted for all the right teams, so no, for today, we're okay.
And we'll see X7 LDLC tomorrow. That's a good one.
That's the spicy one. We're casting it actually, so the curses are going to be real.
Yeah, exactly. Got some decisions to make. Yeah, obviously, the main idea here is to talk about your guys' casting journey, and we can basically go from the start. So obviously that began with, I believe, with the LJL unofficial, and I was reading an interview that you guys did with Inven Global, I think last year, which kind of explained that a bit. How that was basically the first thing you did. So I don't think you guys did any Did you do any kind of amateur cast before that, or was that literally
our amateur cast?
That was our amateur cast.
In fact, I can pin it down to. So was it one of the times where we were hanging out with your friendship group in London watching RuPaul's Drag Race, and then we on the way back. I think I was sat in a tube station with a mutual friend who we started the project with, Mass One, or Lexi, and we were just sat on a tube on the way back from somewhere in North London, and we we're like, hey. I didn't know him as well back then because we'd been around in the same friendship group and we were friends, but not like that close. And then we just sat down on the tube on the way back and we sat there just like we all of us are interested in getting into esports. Let's take this seriously. And I know we don't have the skills right now, but what would it take for us to make something work? What's our strategy? Let's not blindly go into this, and would you be interested in doing it? And then obviously all three of us sat down and we had some conversations about it. That sound about right, Sam? That sounds about
pretty much.
That's how it's in my head.
This would have been basically December of 2019-ish.
Around then, yeah.
At that point, I think I was just graduating my masters. In fact, my graduation was the middle of December, so it would have been around that point. And we were kind of discussing we want to do this, but how on earth do you go about doing it? And it turned out the three of us had the perfect holy trinity of skills because I was wanting to be a play-by-play. Alex had a lot of knowledge about League of Legends, was high diamond, was wanting to give color casting a go. Lexi was really interested in being a host, also had a lot of streaming and production knowledge from back in the day, and is very up to date with a lot of things like how to use Shadow PC and a lot of remote casting and broadcast setup stuff, and had done a lot of that before. And effectively between the three of us, we had a pretty good little casting team, production team, if you're willing to do everything on a shoestring and do it all yourselves, which was a bit nuts looking back, trying to do all of the games with three people.
It was crazy. But yeah, that's effectively how we approach things. We decided to take things very seriously. We had some conversations about what region we wanted to cover, and we had some reasonings behind that too, in terms of where isn't being covered right now. Can we fulfill a niche and then try and make ourselves valuable in that niche? And yeah, we all had some background in talking about esports or gaming to some degree. Back when I was at uni in Sheffield, I was in the gaming society there for a long time, 3-4 years while I was in Sheffield. And basically what I did was every week on the socials, I was talking about gaming, and I was talking about League with the other League players I knew back then, back when I was playing in the UK University League in NUEL. I remember very drunk conversations with a guy called Pilot about why you should sit on Oblivion or back then for the Magic penetration, and doing late night analysis on various builds back in season 6 or 7 or whatever it is. And then I kind of took that same mentality of I like talking about League of Legends, and then I just kind of upgraded that skill set to talking about League of Legends with a camera in front of me.
Yeah, I cheated a little bit because my master's was in game design and theory, so I did a lot of A, making of games, and B, like doing a lot of academic work on them. So I did a lot of some really cool essays on esports and on sort of narrative design stuff. So I've been wanting to get into gaming in one way or another, and this seemed like another way to leverage some of my strengths, which were thinking critically about games, about speaking publicly, and trying to use that in a different way. And of course, ironically, I'm the non-analyst despite the analytical degree background. But similarly, I was wanting to get into the space, and when we started up, I think Alex was still doing university stuff at the point.
2019.
I was still looking.
I started doing a games dev degree back then, actually, back in Westminster Uni. Yeah.
So I was looking to get into some game design companies, and then basically lockdown hit pretty shortly into the beginning of 2020,
which gave us a lot of space to do our thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so instead we went, well, this is still going on, and this is actually going quite well, and we're quite good at it. Let's see how far we can push this. And turns out we could push it quite far.
Clearly, yeah. You say there about like the roles kind of just fit into place as well. Because one thing I read in that interview you did was about how you kind of did like a test cast with an LGL final. One of you mentioned in there that it didn't go too great, that very first one. So was there a second where it's like, should we try swap roles? Is there like a rare forbidden VOD somewhere with one of you?
No,
the VOD is somewhere.
So that VOD is no, Sam. The very first one isn't, because we started off by casting the semi-finals, and we just sat in front of a laptop, and we were just sat on a sofa because it wasn't recorded. We were just like sat shouting at the games. And looking back to it, even back then, considering that we were just winging it, it was okay. At the end of the day, we were just more heavily leaning on our own dynamic back then than we are like fundamentals as we do now. And you want to have like a happy balance between the two in terms of like, this is how you technically want to cast a esports game well, in terms of like how you set up your narratives and the pacing in the game and structuring it, and then also just like having a good conversation and feeling natural about it too. So even right from the start, we could tell that there was good chemistry there, but that bit was fine. What I remember was the consistency aspect of it, because if you get the second week we did of LGL casting back in spring 2020 was just awful. There was a storm which knocked out the internet, and we had to cast off of a laptop, and we didn't have an ad blocker on it, and we were going for Twitch streams.
The Twitch stream had
mid-game, and it was just awful. But I look back at that now. The thing is, though, like, I remember coming off of that and just going like, oh my word, I hope no one sees this for the rest of existence. That was really bad. But then you kind of come back off of that, and you start developing however many months into the future. You look back and you go, it's really good to know that we could start from there and develop past that point. So, so to go back to I know we're going to ramble a lot. That's what we do, tangent a lot. But the initial question of, did we ever try different roles? Not with each other. We've blended the roles sometimes, where, particularly at the start of a team fight, at the end of it, sometimes I can kind of carry on one line of play by playing Sam. With that game dev knowledge and stuff, can definitely add into the analysis side of things too, but we have always loosely kept to our roles. With each other anyway. I have done some play-by-play with some other folks when scheduling needed to, but I've always done color casting.
It's been a side role for both of us. And I think the other thing is we generally felt like it fit. What was tough in the beginning was more like, we just not done broadcasting before, like, for disclosure, like, I'd done like performance stuff, like I'd been a big time, I'd done like a lot of music stuff and performance that way, so I was used to being like live, if that makes sense. But there's I had some idea of like,
there's some showmanship in there, but it's not quite
exactly. And I also came from like a teaching background and an English background, and all the rest of it. So, I had some idea about how to do the public speaking and the stringing of sentences together in a hopefully eloquent manner. But there's a very different skill set that is actually broadcasting, especially doing it as part of streaming broadcasting, as opposed to any other format on a similar kind of vein. And that was the stuff that was tough, because you just don't know what you don't know, and you kind of make all these stupid mistakes. And you look back, and I remember some of the early VOD reviews, and we were going, "Yep, that just doesn't work."
I forever. So there was a thing where it's like, oh, by the way, you start off with every sentence with "yeah." And it's like, yeah, they just did this, and it's like, wow, listening back to it, I really did do that. Or you just speed up every time you talk. You start slow, and you end up going really fast at the end. And so I actually I have this for years. It's actually around here somewhere. I've got a post-it which I've had for about 2.5 years, which I stick to my screen, which says, end your sentences at the same speed that you start, because I just needed to do that. I just needed something in front of me to just go like, Alex, just slow the down.
I bought him that stream deck for his birthday a few years ago, and I've regretted it ever since. He's just got this like full board of just meme things to throw at whoever has to listen to him.
Wicked. Yeah, I'm from the UK. Is there the one, the old Crossfair quote? That'd be a classic one. Proper panda getting something one shot.
Yes. I remember that somewhere in the past. Yeah.
But yeah, so
throwback.
You guys obviously mentioned there then that starting with the LGL unofficial, you kind of looked for that niche. So you'd kind of not even just thought, let's jump into casting and give it a go. It was literally like even thinking long term straight away. Would you recommend that then for anyone sort of up and coming casters now to try and do something a bit more specific, try and kind of have that foresight?
So this is a difficult one.
Yeah.
So forgive me, I've typed out and answered this, and it changes pretty much every 3 months, it feels like, because the scene changes quite rapidly and is changing quite rapidly as things like, the NLC changing its structure and stuff come through and everything else below that. I will say, if you've got the time and people to do it with, absolutely, you can give an unofficial broadcast a go, but be careful of the pitfalls that come into that. You do not want to be competing with a league that already has an English broadcast. That will get you in trouble. All of those kind of things.
Yes.
So do your due diligence in terms of making sure you're not treading on toes. You're trying to do this as a non-profit to get yourself out there, etc., and you've got to try and make sure you're doing it within the legal bounds that are set up. But by all means, if you've got that, it's a great way to get yourself on a consistent league, a consistent cast, and be consisting the same teams at a high level, and build narratives for a split, right? Which you don't necessarily get in amateur leagues where they only play 2 or 3 games and then teams blow up and then you have to come together again, and you're not casting with the same people, the same team, all that stuff. So that's definitely something you can do. Other thing you can do is look to things like Red Gaming or Valence League or other sort of lower amateur leagues, which are still leagues even if they are a little bit looser, because they are always looking for casters. They don't require you to have much experience a lot of the time. That's true of producers as well, and I can tell you now, if you're a producer, hit everybody up, you'll be the most loved person in existence, because producers are gold dust in esports. But that's another really good one to do, is try and find some of the amateur leagues that would love that, and you can get those VODs and then apply to bigger stuff higher up. And if you've got a few VODs to your name, you can then look to talk to people like the NLC Div 3 orgs, which are allowed to broadcast their own games.
Stream.
And they can have their own casters in-house to broadcast their games. And that way you're actually on the ladder a little bit, and you can get your name out there, and then you can start, chatting to try and find something like LeagueWorks, or apply to the LJLOU if we're looking for people, that kind of thing. But it is a matter of, first and foremost, you need to be getting broadcast experience. You need to be getting VODs if you're getting broadcast experience. And if you can, even better, if you can make a show reel out of your VODs of broadcast experience, so people don't have to watch through 40 minutes of your casting to work out what your best parts are, all the better. I know that's quite long-winded. I know there's a few options in there, but that's probably the truth of it. There are a few ways to get started, but those are the ones I think are probably the best, unless Alex has got something else to add to that.
Oh, I mean, the overhead point is, and Sam's covered a lot of stuff there, which is all basically what I'd say anyway, but the overall point is you got to be strategic about something. What's your roadmap? What are you planning, right? So effectively what I ended up doing was, I had LGL, we used our VODs. I think I used the ones which we didn't stream live because it was our practice VODs from the DFM finals in 2019 summer, which we did in December, which were like some of our very first ever cast. I took those videos, applied to the NUEL, and I got in there because I was a student at the time, and they were not really as keen on taking like non-students at the time. So Sam sadly
I just graduated, so they weren't as interested.
Yeah, so like I ended up getting in there, and so I then had LGL and NUEL, and then what we were also doing was going through a lot of amateur tournaments as well, as Sam was saying. So we ended up SQ1. Now, obviously, we did a lot of work for the UKL. That came later. But we were still looking for a lot of amateur stuff. So effectively, what I ended up doing was spreading out my base of where I could start having my footprint of casting. So I had LGL, which is niche in its own way, but it's an unoccupied niche. And then I had the university stuff, which is a bit more well-established, has a bit more structure for me to start building myself into. Then a lot of amateur scene stuff to just have a third kind of outlet from that. So what I will say is try and apply yourself in different scenes to get yourself first different experience, particularly in amateur stuff. You learn a lot of skill sets about how to cast. This is going to sound really bad at first, but how to cast bad League of Legends. If you're casting bronze players, you cast the game very differently from casting the best players in the world. And if you are coming in from watching your LCK and your LPL and your LEC, and you cast the same way and hold them to the same standards, the players which you are casting in like amateur, that is just not going to work. You're not going to deliver an entertaining product. So what I'll say is, be strategic about things. Understand you need to work in the scene that you want to be working in later to some degree, right? Like if you want to work in the LEC, you got to work in the European scene somehow, some way, a lot of the time. Now it gets a little bit weird, like with higher level broadcasty stuff, I suppose, but you want to be working in the scene that you see yourself in, I suppose, even if it is just very far down in the grassroots scene. And then also just try and find yourself as much varied experience as possible to grow your skill set. That's a huge thing. In terms of going back to the initial point of, would I suggest to someone else to do what we did in terms of setting up your own broadcast and filling that niche? You got to know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a lot of work. We spent a year and a half doing it as 3 people with occasional guests, more guests coming in later on. And then eventually we ended up expanding the team because it was just way too much. And honestly, even with a much larger team now, it is still too much work for us who now have effectively full-time jobs in the esports industry. So if you are going to go into this and you want to make a broadcast of your own, it is great experience. It teaches you holistically about esports in a broadcast in terms of the graphics you need and how to produce things, how to prepare for things, how to cast a long-running league, which there aren't many things of. But it is thousands of unpaid, grueling hours, especially if you're coming out from grassroots. You're going to be sat there with like 3 viewers some days. And that's what we were doing at the start. And yeah, you will get beyond that at some point, but you have to understand what you're getting into. Is it a good way to improve your craft? Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
But it is one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a bit like if you want to be a good musician, there is going to be those 1,000 hours of grinding away at learning your instrument, right? And or performing, doing it live and busking and all the rest of it. And there's a similar kind of thing with that. And the thing with an unofficial broadcast is if you're the one running it, you get to sort of do it yourself, right? Everything is yours to do with as you please. It's a lot to do with as you please, and way too much is what we found out eventually. We kind of burned ourselves out on it a little bit. But unlike, say, joining something like Valence League or whatever the amateur leagues are, where you kind of put into an occasional cast, you get a lot more time. Oh boy, do you get a lot more time. But that is one way to improve yourself very, very fast. If you've got the commitment to it, and just like, don't underestimate the fact that, if you're doing, I think what LGL's an 8-team league, so that was 16 games a week. So there'd be like a weekend where it was like, okay, here are, you'd have 8 games in a weekend, 16 in a super week. And they would all happen within the space of like 24 to 48 hours. The super weeks in particular, it was like a 4 a.m. start on a
9
Saturday.
9 a.m. start, if on a good day, 4 a.m. on a bad one.
Yeah, and you'd finished Sunday exhausted, having basically slept 2 hours. It was awesome in a lot of ways. Yeah,
got me out of bed.
And it turned out, and we did it partly because we loved it, and we were quite good at it. Eventually, there was a point where we realized actually there's something to this, and this is worth
pride of
worth the man hours. But it was, suffering for your art a little bit there, and there are probably significantly more efficient ways to do what we did.
Maybe,
So,
I don't know.
yeah.
Also, like, the last point I'll say on this is actually this is us talking from a perspective of us starting 2.5 years ago at this point. It's not the same as it was. As much as you can use the same kind of thought processes, it might not be the same in your part of the world at this point in time. But that's some of the way we thought about problem solving our way through grassroots.
I mean, there are a lot of other unofficial leagues now, like CBLOL, LLA, VCS is a great one, was just before us, and they're phenomenal as well. Like, people have done pretty good work with it.
One thing you guys touched on a little bit there as well was doing SQ1 League, UK EL as well. And as we know, basically from this year, those kind of things don't really exist anymore. And when those got closed down, I think a lot of the sentiment I'd seen was about how the likes of yourselves had kind of come through these leagues, partly come through these and ended up on NLC and LEC. And
we had a week on LEC where it was us 2 casting and Jamada on desk. We had 3 UKEL casters, grassroots, on the LEC. That to me is mind-blowing.
It was nuts.
So, yeah. There's a lot of stuff to do with that.
So I'd seen a lot of sentiment basically saying this is going to make it way harder for the new casters come through. They had these great tools, and kind of like you mentioned, having it as a structured league means you get better at maybe sort of following narratives and things like that as well. Do you see that may have been a problem then? Because another thing you mentioned as well is that a lot of Div 3 teams are now doing their own broadcast, where maybe then it gets the opportunity to load more people because every team might choose different amateur casters or something. So Do you feel it's balanced out at all, or could that actually be a bit of an issue?
Right now, it's not. Right now, it's not balanced out. As soon because it wasn't even just the UKL going and SQ1 going. We also lost Ligan in the Nordics as well, and a number of other grassroots leagues. We're getting to the point where the grassroots is just not present. And while there is the ability to co-stream a lot of games, that's in the minority. It is often not as well run as some of those amateur broadcasts were as well, because actually the people which are running those co-streamers aren't actually looking to primarily do a broadcast. They're primarily there to promote the team and to do stuff with the team. And you'll have someone like a community manager going like, oh, well, we'll also do a cast. It's kind of the secondary kind of motivation at that point. So while I think some people have gained quite a lot from that point, right now we have gone from having fairly high profile for amateur scene tournaments in terms of the UKL and SQ1 to the point where that's not really the case. And you could see the outcry when these leagues were shut down. It was very painful for a lot of the people who had spent a long time in there. I remember the community for the UKL was great. So much character, so many very just explosive individuals which you wanted to follow, and many stories you wanted to follow from that point. Heck, I would even say UKL for a while was actually more entertaining than UKLC, which was the step above it, because of that community aspect to it, because you were so close to those players, and those players had so much character. Without that, you miss out on so much of the ability to create these really compelling stories and also further people's careers at the grassroots.
Yep.
I'll say on this one as well, like I completely agree with what I was saying there, and it is quite sad, I think, to see a lot of the grassroots at the minute being kind of shut down for now. But this is also part of this as well is this is a bad year to talk about it in some ways, because a lot of the changes to the region happened this year, and we need to. I think it'll be interesting to see whether there are new grassroots or more supported grassroots stuff, say this time next year, when the kind of the new system is settled in for a bit longer, and that will be more telling for me as well as to where the state of grassroots is, because obviously right now with the system hugely change up, and particularly Div 3 and lower kind of being completely shifted for around, the question kind of is, what will emerge in its place? Will anything emerge in its place, and to what extent? And I'm hopeful that stuff will, but we're still kind of waiting for that, which makes it a bit of a rough time for a lot of up-and-coming casters, because the opportunities that were around, say, 2 years ago aren't here right now, but might be again in another year, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a
different setup.
Well, at the end of that last question, I was like, well, yeah, by the way, disclaimer, this might not work because we had like 2.5 years. We started 2.5 years ago. The landscape was very different.
Yeah. Maybe just kind of go back a bit on your actual progress in terms of the actual, the craft of casting. So we had a question on Twitter from Saprix or Saprix, I'm not sure how you say it.
Yes, I know them.
Yeah. So the question was, when you guys were just starting, how did you keep track of your progress?
VOD reviews, monstrous amount of VOD reviews. So like basically, I mean, like in terms of how did we work out whether we were improving, or how did we look to improve?
We just flamed each other after every couple of weeks,
hugely.
Really.
So there was a bit of a learning curve in learning how to give appropriate feedback that was helpful and constructive, because the blind leading the blind is definitely a thing. So you've got to be a bit aware, like there are some things you can figure out together, and we all had a fairly good eye and good ear, I suppose, for what things sounded right, what things didn't, and what was, we kind of managed to get through that way. So between myself, Alex and Lexi, the three of us were VOD reviewing pretty much once every week, every 2 weeks. We'd have some feedback points. We'd try and move on from there. Some growing pains working out how to do that, but that was pretty intense and really good. The other thing was having people who were better at casting give us feedback as well, because they kind of would spot things we wouldn't. And 3 was for me particularly, there is a really phenomenal Google Doc which Medic put together a couple years ago now, which is sort of Medic's play-by-play team fighting Bible guide thing, which is really helpful for the people starting out, particularly for play-by-plays, about some of the way you're supposed to think about, or ways you can think about being a play-by-play. And I want to reiterate, that's not the only way to do it. Medic has a very specific
particularly with
style
play-by-play, there are a lot of different styles. Don't get it's a good way to think about it. As long as you're doing the thought process, it's fine.
But that was really helpful for look at finding other ways to structure how you think about casting, structure how you think about even just things you're doing you didn't have a name for. So things like energy management, energy levels, in like, how do you go into a team fight, what level you're at, how do you go up in energy, how do you go down in energy, how do you mix energy and intensity. You can be low energy but high intensity, be quiet. Machine does that amazingly in CSGO, where he has those whispery moments when people are hiding around a corner waiting for the AWP shot, and then he jumps up really high. But he's probably the best in the world at that kind of low energy but really high intensity moments, whereas you compare that to, say, like Captain Flowers, who's capable of just blowing your head off at proper high intensity with like the little rhymes and stuff he throws in. All of that stuff, and how you find out the words for that is kind of insane. And like that guide in particular, if you can find it, is really, really great. I might have a copy of it somewhere.
I'm trying to remember if he had it pinned, actually. Let me.
Yeah, he did for a while. He did for a while. That's where I got it from.
No, he doesn't have it pinned anymore. But yeah, there's a medic team fight casting guide out there. You can find it. Just ask folks. But I mean, yes, in terms of like how did we keep track of our progress? Yeah, it was like a once every week, once every 2 week check-in. That was when we were doing LGL stuff. Also, when I was doing NUEL casting, one of the things which got me quite good quite quickly, I suppose, was being paired up with, as Sam was saying, like better casters than me at the time. And you know, I was casting with Greyheart right from the off, who's been casting for a very long time in the UK university scene and the UK scene in general. And one of the things I very quickly learned was, as a color caster, you need to match the level of your partner as well. If they're getting excited, you also need to be excited with them. Otherwise, you get this mismatch, and that sounds very strange on the ears. And the other casting pair that were in NUEL were Sarge was there, and Sarge is obviously a big figure within the UK casting scene as well, and was very heavily involved in SQ1. They were very good at giving me that good feedback. And that was effectively the other thing. Learning how to give good feedback was huge. Learning how to give and receive feedback was probably the biggest thing. So yes, surround yourself with talented folks if you can. It sometimes that can be hard. It's hard to get casting jobs some places and actually have continued kind of rapport with some of these other folks. I would suggest starting with some other folks which are as motivated as you and around a similar level as Sam, Lexi, and I did, so you can kind of keep each other accountable and kind of progress together. That can be very helpful, and giving yourselves kind of like third-party perspectives on what you're doing. And then obviously the other thing is watch your own VODs back. It took me a very long time to not hate the sound of my voice. I'm not exactly the most secure person in history. I have my own insecurities, but I just had to sit there and go, right, I just got to listen to what I did, and if I don't like the way that I did this, even if I'm being harsh, what would I change about it? And that's kind of how we would keep track of our progress. Every couple of weeks we'd be doing this continual process, and by doing a lot of games, I averaged casting a game a day for, well, since I started, so 2.5 years of casting a game a day, and having this review process. Even if you start off bad, if you review well, you will just get better, and you will surpass people who don't review as well as you. That's the most important thing you can do as an amateur caster.
Yeah. Yep. And kind of on the topic then of reviewing and getting feedback. So this is going to kind of sound like a bit of a roundabout way to get to the question, but one thing I'd heard...
Oh, we like roundabout here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you figured this out. We've rambled for 30 minutes at this point.
Yeah, so one thing I'd heard before was about... It was in a discussion about players making it from the ERLs up to the LEC. One thing I'd heard was that, you know, a lot of the top ERL players in each role might be very similar level, but as soon as one of them gets up to the LEC, then the increase in the level of coaching and things that they get, basically said it's like a cheat code. Like once you get in the LEC, you improve so much quicker that then you are miles better than what's in the ERLs. So to kind of bring it back to an actual question, obviously both of you guys have now appeared on the LEC with, you know, then you're mingling with people like Quickshot and Shock. So like, have been, you know, they've been around forever. They're the biggest names in the game, really. So what is it like when you get to that level and then you're getting feedback from those kind of people? So, you know, how much does that help?
Well, the thing is though, Sam's mainly been casting with me. So in terms of getting feedback from casting partners, like it's a little bit weird because Sam's been
mine's second hand for everybody else. It goes to Alex and then to me.
Yeah. But in terms of like my experience with it, I mean, so everyone on the LEC is incredibly talented. In terms of the skill set of giving feedback, that can sometimes be a little bit mismatched. I mean, not everyone who's a top level caster is, because they're not always in that role, right? But particularly someone like Quickshot has really developed that skill set to just an incredible level. And there is a reason why Quickshot is often praised as this person that can make anyone look good he's on cast with, because he's so good at giving that feedback and giving that prep. Every time we go into a cast, we will turn up an hour early to the show to sit down, or on another day, sit down and go, okay, what are you feeling about this matchup? And the way he also does that is also sit down and say, I don't consider you like inferior in some way. I consider you a peer or a colleague. I'm working with you, and therefore we are, we're on the same level at this point. And I really appreciate that, because Quickshot has this real way of kind of getting to know you and the way that you cast and the way that you think about the game, and then kind of getting into the advice that you can get afterwards in terms of like, I feel, so there was a point where first day I was casting LEC, after those games, he said, hey, I feel like I'm leading you in the cast a little bit. How about tomorrow you try and start more of the points and lead some of the narratives? And I said, okay, I'll try that. And the next day I did do that, and I noticed an improvement over it. And it's stuff like that, just very incisive words, which just, when you get up to the LEC level, you do have some individuals who do have that real ability to give really good feedback. So I've experienced a lot from that, particularly with Quickshot, as I said, and he is the one that is famous for it. And I do just want to reconfirm what people say about that. Quickshot is really good to cast with, especially someone who's going up to that level for the first time. And then what I do is I take that, I give it out secondhand to people like Sam and other folks who are around, and I'm like, okay, this is what the LEC told me to do. You can do this as well, with 10 easy tips from this one shady online website or whatever.
Yeah, and like, I think for my end, obviously I was doing a lot of in-studio casting at the NLC, and I was doing a lot of that with Nymaera, of course, but then with the likes of Trouble and Gulborg, who are phenomenal casters as well, but very different styles of casters. And so there was a lot of really good learning in terms of how we were prepping narratives for games and narrative threads, and how we were going to like, what matchups we were going to focus on, and what we were actually looking to talk about in games, and how we wanted to talk about them. And that's one of the things that you learn the higher up you go as well, is how to prepare in a way that's actually going to be helpful. Because there are ways of preparing for a game and preparing to cast, and that's, like, once you've got your mechanics of casting down, actually a lot of what really gets you up to another level is pulling a Blue Peter, right? Here's something I prepared earlier that's like really constructive. I've got a beautiful little graphic that comes along with it. Wow, isn't this pretty? And there is a real art to figuring out what matchups you're going to follow, why you're going to follow them, any bigger narratives and things you can pull together, and learning how to do that judiciously, because you can overdo it or underdo it and all that kind of thing.
Probably the area which I've had the most like learning curve this year in terms of like when you're amateur and you're doing like particularly desk segments. This is less when you're in cast, but like when you're doing the game, the content between games, is how do you build a show? What's the thought process which goes into, I want to make this point, these are the assets I need for it, this is the story that we're telling. Now, the LEC is probably like the premier product for doing that in the entirety of esports, where they'll chisel out exactly how to make the best point in the best possible way. And it is incredible to see folks like Gulborg's really good at this, actually. Shock's very good at this in terms of just Kadril actually very good at his narrative stuff there too. When we walked into the TriCast we were doing the other day, who is just like, blam, 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 this is the flow I want to do. That was in cast, but a similar kind of skill set. So blam, 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 this is the narrative I want to tell. This is the best way to visually show it. This is the flow we want between it. And I'm like, getting that to a point where you're instinctive with it is absolutely crazy, but you can see, but learning that kind of ability to tell the best story in the best way, so it sounds really easy and natural on the viewers, it's a lot of learning. It is an awful lot of learning. That's probably where I've made my most progress with this year.
And it's also like there is an art to doing that as more than just one person, right? Because you're doing it generally as part of a cast duo or a cast trio if you're on a TriCast, and that has its own complexities to it. But there is actually something really important about aligning yourselves and how you want to tell this story. Or if you don't align, then making an interesting conversation. Because there's definitely times where I have disagreed, say, with Alex, and we've had that conversation where it's completely fine to disagree, but you need to basically set it up as not being, I hate this person or they're wrong. It's just we've got a different take, and there is an art to disagreeing appropriately. And
great example of this. So the playoff series I did for LEC the other day, game 1, Rogue pick Jarvan with basically no other follow-up, and it absolutely sucks. And at the end of the game, Kadril has the opinion, don't pick the Jarvan. And I say, actually, I disagree. I think you pick you more engaged to go with the Jarvan, and I think it works out that way. And we set up, like, effectively the viewer can tag onto both sides of this. Do you agree with one side or the other side, and see the different thought processes? And it's a healthy discussion. Both are right in their own way, and it's a great way to have not just like this monotone broadcast of everyone sharing the same opinion. So yeah, that's a really important skill to train as well. So I think Sam's picked a good one there. The art of disagreeing. That could be like our duo like biography. The art of disagreeing.
I'm definitely coming out on top in that one. But
I won't disagree. Is that?
There you go. That's why you're losing.
Nice. Just while we're talking about you guys casting the LEC, then, so yeah, obviously yourself, Nymaera, you've been on there a bit more at the moment, and Initialise, you've made your debut now as well. And that game where you made your debut, am I right in thinking that was the game where your dad was in the crowd as well?
Yes.
Watching you both.
Yes,
What was that like?
I was very emotional.
Yeah.
I was very emotional.
True. It was really cool.
Yeah.
So we were hoping to get both mum and dad out there. Because of the way things work with just esports, the way scheduling worked out, it was only a couple of weeks' notice. For our mum is a GP, and I'm quite an overworked one at that. So she just couldn't get the time off, which was a bit sad. So dad came along, mum couldn't, but it was our debut cast as well, and dad managed to come out. It was really, really, really special. I think as well because in some ways it's kind of like. There's all those movies like, look, Dad, I've made it. Like, it was basically that moment, where you actually felt like, having moved to Berlin, having done all the amateur grind to get to commentate with my brother, with my dad in the crowd, on an LEC gig, with a crowd, in a studio, and the games be exciting. It was an absolute dream come true. Getting to see him waving from the crowd was really special.
Yeah, because... Oh, how deep do we go on this actually? Because I mean,
how deep are you going?
how feels are we going with this? Because casting in a lot of ways has not just like reshaped my life, but God, before I got into casting, I was not in a great place. Like, I was real rock bottom for a little while, and it took me a long time to get out of that. And part of how I did that was by finding purpose and a real satisfaction in the level of the craft which I could put out. Being good as a caster meant a lot to me. It gave me a lot of value as someone who kind of struggled to have that sometimes before. And very rarely in life do you get those big moments where everything comes together and you just feel vindicated and you feel satisfied and go like, all this time, all this effort, all these risky, difficult decisions we made. Hell, I mean, I dropped out of uni for casting. I effectively flunked a degree for casting. To have that all come together with the family support in that too, getting to not just be on the LEC stage, and that was very special doing it, and the first time I was in front of a crowd was special, and the first time having Sam there and Dad there was kind of like it was just like this crowning achievement of, you know what, you've done pretty okay. It was really special. It is one of those moments which I will remember till the end of my days. It was very, very special. It meant an awful lot.
It's kind of, I suppose, the equivalent I've always kind of used is if you look towards the music industry, right? It's the record signing. It's the going from playing, the pub tour where you're making some decent pocket change, but really you have to, work as a barista somewhere else or have a second job or whatever to make ends meet. And while you might be a musician, it's not paying the bills per se. And that moment where someone comes and offers you the contract saying, all right, you're going to be a rock star. Here's the contract. It's that kind of vibe where you can be really, really good at casting. I've got some amazing colleagues, some amazing friends who are really, really good at casting, but haven't had that break yet. And you can never guarantee that in something like casting or music or whatever other creative industry, because in the end, you've still got to wait on that opportunity, I guess. And sometimes you just don't get it. And we've been very lucky in a lot of ways to have actually put in the work, but then also got that opportunity, which not everybody does, and there is a little bit of that there as well. So very grateful, really, to have managed to make this work, at least so far.
Yeah, and not everyone has that same family support as well. So, our parents are absolutely just wonderful. I wouldn't change them for the world. So to have them there and kind of like be there to share in the achievement was really nice.
And then the next step is for them both to be watching you at Casting Worlds, I suppose. That's
it.
The next
That's it. That would be amazing.
And specifically, if we could cast Detonation Focus Me at an
there would be something really special about that.
That's
there you go.
Yeah.
None of these, like tier 1 first seeds.
I'm one of the few people who would genuinely love to cast plans more than I would groups.
I think your dream cast would absolutely be DFM versus T1.
If DFM were competitive, yeah.
Yes. yeah.
We saw what happened the last time they were in groups.
Mum and Dad are fighting.
Yeah,
but then it's kind of, you might want DFM to do all right, but then that kind of backfires on Team 1. They'll have a truck outside the office before you know it.
What I said, and this came true in the Worlds group stage they were in, because Aria was my favorite player back in 2021 as well, and he still is, even though he's benched. It was like, I want T1 to win, but if Aria does well, that's awesome. And he solo kill Faker, so there we go, right? And I started watching League. Well, Sam introduced me to the game, but the first thing I ever did in League was watch Faker playing Aria at Worlds 2013, and that's how I got into the game. So a lot of cool things converging for me in that kind of game.
Yep. Just one thing I wanted to talk about then as well. This is to do with kind of linking to a tweet that you made recently, Nymaera, where I think it was on one of your EUM casts. You'd kind of shouted out a couple of.
That was yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, so you shouted out to people that have kind of helped you. Maybe with some narratives and things about some of the leagues you'd maybe not necessarily seen, or maybe couldn't keep up with as much. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that in general, because I feel like some people maybe get an idea. This is kind of going a bit higher up, but when people are casting, with the World Championships, obviously most of the English-speaking broadcasts, wouldn't have watched necessarily the OS region or Pacific Asia, these kinds of things. So. Do you feel like that's something that more people should be doing in general, even at that level
100%,
as well?
yes. How far do I go on this? I don't want this to come across as salty, but particularly with League international events, I think that a lot of folks get away with not knowing about the teams that they are casting because the audience also don't know about them. Now, it is also your job to teach them about those teams. But say, for instance, you go back to this MSI this year, and the Vietnamese team was a team called Saigon Buffalo. Now, I can guarantee you, the thing which most people will remember about that team is Mark Ruffalo Saigon Buffalo memes. That's it. And there is a VCS English broadcast, which has worked incredibly hard for a number of years. They're a fan-run broadcast in the same way that we do the LGL thing. They put out they in fact had a PowerPoint to send to the on-air casting team. And yeah, I have to say, I feel like a lot of people didn't know about the team. And instead of them being the most creative drafting team, the experimental VCS team that knows how to draft just to crazily destroy their opponents, was known actually as just this meme team from Vietnam. And that storyline then ends with them, and you don't get to carry that on. I have felt it with DFM and the Japanese teams, because they are teams which have rarely found success. And I don't ever want this to be the case in other regions as well, where it feels like because they are destined to fail, you don't put in the effort to actually tell their stories. So I came into the EU Masters play-ins, into play-ins, and I saw some of the games there, and I kept up with some of the casters, and I cast some of the games over in the universe as well. But I came to this group stage, and I was like, look, I don't know about these teams, and I've had a lot of them, right? I watched their finals, but I don't have the time to watch their entire seasons. I don't have the time to chisel out stories to the most level that I can in a time-efficient manner. How about I ask people who've done that already? And I credit them, because it is a community of casters and analysts who get to do that work for you. Serious credit to folks like Shox, Kelsey Moser, where around international events, if they want to know about the LGL, they come ask me, they come ask Sam, they come ask Lexi about our teams, because I do feel like there is a lot of resources out there which are currently not being used, and we are missing stories. We are missing tons of history on incredibly storied teams when the resources are there to tell those stories. And that to me is very sad. I'm really sad. I mean, there are some players which have been playing for absolute years, and the community just doesn't know about them because their stories aren't being told on broadcast. And I get that there is a time efficiency manner to it, but I feel like there is a time efficient manner to prepare for these teams, and it's to reach out to these analysts and also give them some damn credit, because at the end of the day, if you're going to take their work, credit them for it too. I've had some cases where some folks have reached out to me and they've said, oh, I talked to someone about the LGL. I'm like, yeah, huh? Wonder who that was. And it's just kind of left at that point. So that's why yesterday, I did credit the folks. I shout out Solari for the Ultra Liga, Moonboy for the PG Nationals, the Italian League, Middlecott and the LFL casters on the English side of things for the LFL, and a whole load of other people. And guess what? I'm going to keep doing that for the rest of this event, because I couldn't do my job as well as I did if I hadn't reached out to them, and they haven't given me these really great storylines. So yeah, I think that is a huge point. It can come across as a bit salty. I know that there is there is an ongoing issue, particularly at top level esports, in terms of how much time are you actually being paid for as a top level talent to prepare for these events. But I feel like it is really sad where the resources are there and not being used to portray not underseen, I don't know, less well known regions, we'll put it that way, right?
And
I feel like it's
the
just
radar.
Yeah, and I feel like it's sad that they have some incredible storylines just not ever really be told.
Yep.
Good question. You need to watch my words very carefully on that one to see how salty I get, but yeah.
Good diplomatic answer then. But yeah, talk about EU Masters then, just kind of go a bit more general on what's going on at the moment. So obviously we've got the couple of NLC representatives still there with Dusty and X7. What are we thinking their chances are just in general? How far do you think they could go?
Depends. The upper ceiling of both teams is very, very high. They've got like the hands. Both teams are very, very good. I think probably X7 have slightly better hands. Dusty have slightly better synergy and a little bit more weirdness to them, which stands them in good stead when they can do things like, interesting Soraka Seraphine bot lanes, and then Kerberos has got things like Darius and Nasus to pull out. Makes them quite interesting.
You're cutting out a little bit there, Sam.
I possibly messed around with my gain a little bit because I think there was some traffic outside that was coming across the microphone. So I'm hoping if I'm
hoping it's a Discord thing. It's just
it might be a Discord thing. Yeah. I'm hoping it's solved now too. I just got to put the game back where it was and just deal with it that way. There we go. But yeah, typical. I try to fix it and cause more problems. That sounds about right when it comes to tech stuff. Yeah, I think both are probably playoffs caliber. How far into playoffs is a bit variable because I actually do think there's a lot of very good teams and draws will matter. Because you look at all of the LFL teams and you go, yep, they're all semi-finalist caliber. You look at a team like, some of the teams like Heretics or Giants, they've got some talent to them. Unicorns of Love, holy moly, Ruby and Lurox are fantastic. Really, really good showing yesterday to just murder Yeskla's Zeri multiple times in a row. And while I think Dusty and X7...
games I've ever seen.
Well, Dusty and X7 are very much in that mix. It is a mix, and I think unlike last split where X7 were coming in looking really, really strong and kind of had a bit of an unfortunate quarterfinals, I think this split there's a little bit more of a mix of teams who look quite good.
Yeah, I think my take is, I think in spring, NLC had better results than people give them credit for, especially with X7 meeting one of the very strongest teams in the tournament very early on. I think that X7 LDLC as a quarterfinals could have been a finals matchup in another world, actually, if, of course, Common Core ended up winning, but for the X7 to go out in the quarterfinals like that, I think people will just look at the score and go, oh, well, whatever, NLC go out in quarterfinals. Bifrost losing in their quarterfinals 0-3 was a little more sad, but of course they came through play-ins. We had both of our teams get to quarterfinals, 100% quarterfinals rate, which of course with no other region managed to do that. We can be proud of that one. But coming into this tournament, I think my expectations are a little more tempered because of just the consistency of talent across the league, as across the entire tournament, as Sam was saying. And yeah, I think when you're looking at Dusty, I think that they are the definition of a comfort team. If they have the comfort picks, they are really, really good. Kerberos on Darius, on his individual picks, which he's just played for years. When you've got their bot lane, which play a lot of Aphelios right now, and the Nautilus, and Renata and Thresh, which Stend has continually gone back to, you can see how important that is to them. And then, of course, even the mid and jungle have a lot of their own pocket picks. Yasuo, Diana. You've also got the Graves in the jungle, which very few people play right now. And that was Karthus, yeah, right. Loads of farming junglers, which less people are playing right now. So Dusty, I feel like if they're on comfort, they can really punch above what people think their weight is right now. And I think that they will... they're going to crack a couple of heads, and I think a couple of people are going to be quite surprised with how well they do. At the end of the day, they're the NLC first seed. NLC is not a weak region, and even though there are strong teams elsewhere, Dan Voxney said on his interview after their first win, we're also a strong team. There are a lot of strong teams, but it doesn't mean we're not as well. X7, I really want to see what happens with them if they drop a couple of games, because we saw what happened in their reverse sweep. That must have been very difficult for them. And chatting with some of the players afterwards, I think it did hit some of their players quite hard, because it would, right? Because they were reverse swept in the finals. There's no easy way around that. As Sam was saying, mechanically, very proficient players. I think the ceiling of this team is incredibly
Very
high.
Yep.
I think if they're not at that ceiling, we'll see. They are in a tough group. Particularly when you've got LDLC, you can expect a 0-2 there in some ways. LDLC are one of the very strongest teams in the tournament, especially if X7 aren't at peak. We'll see how that goes. And then I go Rogue with their actual full roster. Well, we'll see what happens there. Of course, they didn't play most of their finals with their full roster, so it's a bit hard to benchmark them. Yeah, I could see that X7 if they fumble a little bit, one best of one against a Go Rogue, and suddenly they're actually in a bit of trouble, particularly because LDLC, that's a hard matchup to win. But if they get out of that group, we'll see how far they can go.
Yep, definitely. Just maybe one or two more viewer questions then before we start kind of winding down. We had a few in the chat, so we've got 2 questions from Lauren. First one, what one piece of advice would you give to those who want to get into casting? Just any single advice?
Watch your own Okay, I'll give 2. Watch your own footage. Start with someone else that you can review with. I think those 2 things will carry you a really long way. It's just part of the review process. As I was saying before, if you are someone that reviews better than the people that you're around you at your same level, you will be better than them. Even if it takes some time, you will be better than them. So anything which helps you in your review process, do it.
And a question kind of similar to that as well, or links to that a bit, from Kai Prioska, who you guys obviously know well.
Yep.
What do you think is the biggest basic mistake that newcasters make that's easiest to fix?
Oh, this one's super easy. It's over talking.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
It's absolutely on both sides of this. Trust your co-caster to give space, and if you don't trust them, you need to chat with them. It is super, super, super easy to overrun each other and cause a lot of issues. So just be willing to throw, is the term. So throwing and catching. So, you throw to your fellow caster. Do that and make sure that you are paying enough attention to the game state to know when you have time to throw and also when you don't have time to keep going. Like color casters will, there is an art to when you are on camera making a good point in a short amount of time because you don't have time to go.
Talk less, say more.
Yeah.
Talk less, say more. So this is something which I've gotten a lot of feedback from as well. Particularly at the start of the year, I was still doing this a lot. I think it was still a little bit harsh. Anyway, it was feedback which I got in terms of the way that I like to craft my stories is I love to link points. But sometimes when I'm just not half-assing it, but when it's not my best shot at it ever, all I've done is I've spoken for a minute and mentioned 4 different things, and you have to choose which one of those 4 things you listen to. So, yeah. As a color caster, it happens a lot because at the end of the day, you are there to add depth to things, and depth comes with an amount of information. Judging the amount of time you have to speak in and catering a point to it so it is just effective and easy to grasp it's incredibly difficult to do, but it starts with understanding how efficient you can be with your words.
Yeah. I'll add 2 other ones in there because these are really nice ones anyway. So they're probably not that's definitely step 1. But the other one is make sure to laugh when your other caster says a joke because otherwise people would think.
Yeah,
it's really
Greyheart,
awkward.
laugh at my jokes. Why don't you?
Vice versa.
He made a point of not laughing at my jokes. he was literally just there, I'm not going to laugh at you, so you look... Thanks, Stan. Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate that.
But there is a real art to laughing when someone makes a joke and just make it obvious because otherwise it can end up being very awkward. There's a very famous cast where Spawn and Medic were casting with each other way back season 6, 7, something like that. And both were being one's Australian, one's British. Both were ribbing each other very sarcastically, and people legitimately thought they were fighting on air, and they were like, "No, we're just being sarcastic. It's fine, guys."
This particularly happens in Europe when you have a lot of second language English speakers, where some of that tone is less second nature. You need to sometimes learn how to be blatant about humor, even if you are more of a reserved person.
So just make it obvious when you are joking or being silly or mean or whatever. Make sure that it is obvious. It's a skit, right? And the other one. Oh damn! I've forgotten. I had another one, but I've clearly talked too long. That's the one that's one about. Oh, that's it. Vocab list.
Oh yeah.
It's one of the things you'll work out early on is that you are using a lot of the same words over and over and over again. So just have a list of a few words in front of you to try and break yourself out of that. Particularly helpful for play-by-plays, for color casters. Sometimes it's nice to have a list of ways to pick up from the end of a team fight. So have a few set phrases to come out from something with. If you're struggling to come up with something cool on the fly, it makes it a lot easier that you don't fall into the trap that Alex talked about earlier of the and go in that he was saying he was stuck on for a while.
Other really bad mistakes that some folks make. This is one for the color casters out there. Never in your goddamn life steal a Nexus call. It's the play-by-plays job. Now, play-by-plays, and this is a big thing which Quickshot does. Every top-level play-by-play does this, where they will have a line for the end of the game or the end of the series, and that's why they often sound so damn good, because they practiced it, they've wanted it. Unless you have discussed with your play-by-play before the game, never talk over the Nexus explosion if your play-by-play is someone that likes to do that, because it robs their thunder and it ruins the moment. That could be their montage moment, and they've prepared for it. don't steal that. So that's a simple mistake which some people make. Let the play get hype when like the series ends. Just let that happen. Just don't do it.
Good advice. And then the second question we had from Lauren as well, saying more general than about casting, but how are you enjoying living in Berlin compared to the UK? Do you feel like the UK is lacking when it comes to esports compared to in Berlin?
Well, I think what it's lacking in regards to Berlin is just the events which are there. Berlin, put it this way, if you just change the infrastructure and just dump the LEC studio in London somewhere or whatever, I don't see what the huge difference is there. I think that I do think that Berlin has a lot of good things going for it in terms of it is in the middle of Europe. Currently, obviously, being in Europe is obviously really good for Berlin, and obviously with the UK, that doesn't help in terms of visas with the Brexit issues. Now, I'm sure there are some ways around it. If people wanted to make it work, it'd be great. And I really miss esports events in the UK. I think one thing which is really missing from the UK compared to Berlin and elsewhere is local esports events. We just don't have any. I think, actually, we were talking about this just before we went live, actually. The last one which we really had was NUEL Cup. And that was that best of 5 between Misfits and Excel. And that was awesome. I really liked that. In fact, I've met like 20-odd people who were at that event who are now in prominent positions in esports, ourselves included. And I think that's one thing which I'd say, difference between Berlin and the UK and large parts of it is just those local esports events and setting up a space for people to actually use that passion for esports and go explore it and be excited about it and meet other people with it. Because unless you're going to like, I mean, there are some things in London like Red Bull Gaming Sphere, watch parties, Meltdown, doing some stuff, but it's so London centric, which is I get that people are there, but it is all London centric, and it's not that often, and it's mainly university driven as well. Actually,
it's all venue driven. So it'll be like another really good example: Pixel Bar in Leeds, great odd place, really really awesome. And there's a few like gaming bars type thing around London as well, like Loading Bar and that kind of thing. But they're kind of like double up more as like board game cafes and stuff. But they'll do events, right? But then they're kind of tied to the venue, and it feels like actually there's a real room for somebody like Razer or Fnatic or the XL or whatever to do things in venues and make something like combine together to make more events happen, because there isn't that much happening at the minute. Whereas Berlin has got things like Level, if you've ever heard of Level, which is like basically it's a bar come esports arena where they do like regular ARAM gauntlet tournaments where people can win loads of stuff by like fighting multiple people in a row in an ARAM, and the higher up the gauntlet you go, the more things you win, but the harder your opponents you're facing, and that gets cast and streamed and all the rest of it, and that's really cool. And they do, and then there's also a bar, and it's also got loads of other stuff. That kind of thing is missing a little bit in the UK.
Yeah, so I finally have my German residency card, so I was able to travel back to the UK recently, and I visited the XL HQ. I've been kind of like not quite Shoreditch, just kind of around there. I had a chat with them and be like, so when are you doing your local esports events? And I was walking around with Hiprain as well, because Hiprain is also like another big name within the UK, and it's also his birthday today. So happy birthday, Hiprain!
Happy birthday to Hiprain!
Yeah, but there was I'm going to go on the absolute warpath to get local esports events back in the UK at some point, because I'm sick of it. I want to meet more people in the UK who know about esports. I know that people in the UK want more of that too. And heck, actually, there's a Leicester Square Razer store which is doing like they haven't announced it yet. Well, here you go, sneak peek. They're going to be doing like a little gaming thing on the 10th, and I'm going to be heading back to London to hang around and go to that while I'm back in the UK. And I'm like, I will show up if you have local esports gigs and stuff. I would like to do that. No, I just want to meet people to do that. I want to go to watch parties. I want to meet more people with that. And if I want to do that, I'm sure there are other folks who want to do that too. So, yeah. I know it's a bigger point between like living in London and Berlin, and I know we kind of hijacked it with that. Berlin's a nice enough place. The internet could be better. I'll say the infrastructure here is kaput. Yeah, we're lucky enough with the internet. Well, you can see it's been stable for this one. That's not so great. But I've met a lot of lovely people around here. Having the Prime League based in here and the NLC based out here too, it means that there's a lot of nucleated esports stuff, which makes it very good for kind of like exploring our interest and meeting people through the industry. But actually, Berlin as a city itself, it's not home yet. We'll see whether it gets to that point.
Yeah, we finally got our own flat and stuff as well, which was a bit of a nightmare. It took us a long time to get things like visas and the rest properly sorted.
Well,
but yes.
When you're over there, then, what is the thing you miss the most from back home? And then maybe what's like an opposite? What's one thing that you're like, oh, thank God I'm not there for that?
So the big one
it's
for
cheaper
London.
than London.
Yeah.
I'll say that. I don't miss the costs.
Oh my god.
And then the positive thing. Oh yeah, go on, Sam. You go.
I think the thing I miss the most though is the food in London is just phenomenal. You can get food from. Oh, did I? Don't know why that happened. Anyway, the food in London is just phenomenal. Like, so good. You can get it from all over the world, and I definitely felt Berlin is a lot more mixed when it comes to the food you can get. Some of it's really good, and some of it's.
Yeah, I feel like the only thing I see people mention is just kebabs.
Yeah, I mean, like, but that kind of, it feels like that's, in a lot of ways, that's kind of the only fast food you find regularly, right? Like, it's the only takeaway you'll find regularly on the street. Whereas if you go down any given street in the middle of London, you'll find, you know, somewhere that's doing, I don't know, bao buns, another one's doing like curry, like Japanese curry, someone's doing a giant wrap, someone's got sandwiches, someone's got kebabs, there's a chicken place around the corner. You know, you've got so much variety from all over the place. Berlin, it's like you'll probably have, you know, a McDonald's or whatever, and just loads of kebab stores. And if you love kebab, that's great. They do great kebabs. Don't get me wrong. But if you're not in the mood for a kebab, it could be a bit limiting.
Yeah. Well, I suppose like the big thing which I miss is one, being close to the family and friends is the big thing, right? Like I haven't lived outside of the UK before, so that's going to be a big change. And when I get more into the habit of like actually flying about and traveling, that'll be better. But you know, so much of my life is still tied to the UK, and I don't have that in Berlin right now. And that's not related to particularly any location which I could have moved to. It's just moving away from somewhere you've been for a while is just going to be tough like that. Uprooting your life for esports is something you have to do a fair bit to move out to gigs close to the studio and whatever. But it is not easy. It has been one of the most stressful times of my life getting out here. Yeah, that's the thing which I'd say I miss the most, family and friends. Although the food is a really good shout as well.
Yeah. Very nice. Well, with that, we can sort of start bringing it to a close then. Is there any kind of final comments or anything you guys wanted out there?
I mean, thank you for listening. Understand that I'm the better Hapgood. That's really important to know. Alex is still, trying to live up to the shadow I cast. I know that's really hard, but he's never going to quite make it because I'm
Sad, you're like half a foot shorter than me.
I make up for it with ego.
Need I say, anyone who says I am the king is not actually the king, Sam.
I never said that. I just said I'm the greatest. That's very different.
Well, turns out you can apply that to multiple situations. Closing comments. I suppose I have been really fortunate with the amount of support I've had on so much social media and people reaching out to me throughout this year. It is very difficult stepping into a well-established product like the LEC and being up there, and you turn on the stream and it's not going to be a Cadrel or a Vedi, it's this guy. And I get that is not going to be what some people tune in for. And the fact that even with that, I've had so much support has been really humbling in a lot of ways, actually. Now, I back myself. I think I'm good at what I do. I understand that there will be teething issues where people get used to me in a lot of ways, and I won't be as good in some aspects as some people. And I'll improve on those over time. But I need that time sometimes, right? So for me, closing comments are for anyone that has left a kind message or a comment, whether it's in a YouTube chat or on a Reddit comment or on Twitter or reached out on Insta DMs or whatever. Or hell, if you've just sat there and nodded at the screen and go, this guy's all right, and not muted the stream, I thank you so much, actually, because that means an awful lot. Trying to break into such an established product like the LEC, I was very wary of what that meant, but the support which I've had from you out there has made it very, very easy for me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think my mildly, ribbing older brother comments there aside, I think Al's really onto something there. It's been really special, really, in a lot of ways to have that kind of support. And, from my perspective as well, it's always really nice when I sort of see Alex reading these comments and going, oh, this is, actually, I can tell you from the bottom of my heart as well, thank you. It's been really special seeing Alex get that support as someone who's very close to him, and vice versa. It's really cool having those kind of messages come in and say you're doing an all right job. And there's still lots to improve on. There's still lots of room to grow. But even so, the support from the community is not unnoticed, and it is certainly not taken for granted by either of us. So again, thank you so much for all that, and hopefully we can continue to deliver and be entertaining on air. For the jobs we do, which would be bad if we weren't, because then we wouldn't really be doing our jobs right.
Nice. High five, Sam.
Is it this way?
No, the other way.
Good
So
job.
bad at this.
I could just go into the other room and high five you there. You're literally in the other room.
Nice. Well, yeah, with that, then I think we can wrap up. So thanks very much for joining me, guys.
No,
Really
thank
nice
you
having
for
a
your
chat.
time.
Thank
It's been
you.
really
It's
good.
been great.
Lovely stuff. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening and watching. And we'll see you again soon.
Yep.